Snow still clung to the black ridges of the Bitterroot Range, though the wind coming down from the peaks carried the faint scent of thawing earth. Dawn was only a smear of pale light on the horizon, and in that half-light, Mercy James sat hunched on a stump beside the ashes of a dead fire. Her dress, once blue, was stiff with frost, her eyes swollen from a night of weeping. A shadow fell across her, broad and unhurried. Abram Coulter stepped into the weak glow from the banked coals, the smell of pine smoke clinging to his buffalo hide coat. He was a big man, with shoulders like the trunk of a spruce and a beard gone silver in the cold. His voice was low, almost casual, when he said it, words that seemed to fall like a stone into a still pond. "By sunrise, you'll be my wife." The words stopped her sobbing for a breath, though the tears still clung to her cheeks. She looked up at him, mouth parted, unable to tell if it was a threat, a promise, or some unholy mix of both. He didn't wait for her reply. Abram turned and walked back toward his camp, the faint crunch of snow under his boots the only sound between them. But it hadn't begun here, not with her on a stump and him making that strange, heavy declaration. No, it started the day before, with the weather turning ugly and Abram riding down from the high pass into a country that wasn't friendly to strangers. The sun had been a pale disk behind thin cloud, the wind sharp enough to slice the breath from his throat. His mare picked her way along the narrow trail, hooves snapping frozen branches under the snow crust. Abram had been hunting elk, but the tracks had led him too far into the low valleys. By the time he thought about turning back, the wind had shifted and he caught another sign. Smoke, faint but distinct, curling up from the cottonwood bottom a mile off. He would have kept riding, but there was something in the way the smoke drifted that made him slow. Not a cooking fire, too thin. The kind you make when you've got nothing dry left and you're hoping it'll catch. The girl appeared first as a shape, hunched and lopsided, stumbling through the willows. She was large, broad in the shoulders and hips, but she moved like she'd been beaten down by miles. Her dress was torn at the hem, a scrap of brown shawl clinging to one arm. Abram reined in. He didn't call out. She looked up at him, and for a moment he thought she might bolt like a spooked doe. But she only stopped, breath showing in quick clouds, her hands working at the fabric bunched around her middle. "You lost?" he asked. Her mouth worked, but no sound came. Finally, she shook her head, once, then looked past him, back toward whatever she'd come from. The wind shifted again, and Abram smelled it then. Not just wood smoke, something else. Burnt canvas, grease, a faint coppery tang. "What's back there?" Her eyes flicked up to his, quick, bright, and full of something he couldn't quite name. Not fear exactly, not shame, maybe the worn-out remnant of both. She didn't answer. Abram could have ridden on. Wasn't his affair if a girl wandered off from some trouble in the valley. He'd been living alone too long to go meddling. But the thought of her sitting out here in the dark tonight, frost creeping into her bones, gnawed at him. He swung down from the saddle, letting the reins drop. "You got a name?" She hesitated, as if speaking it might cost her something. "Mercy," she said at last, her voice low and raw. "Well, Mercy," he said, glancing toward the treeline, "you're headed the wrong way if you aim to live through the night." His camp was nothing more than a lean-to of pine boughs against a rock face, a fire pit, and a pile of split wood. He gave her the stump near the flames and poured hot coffee from the blackened pot. She didn't drink it first, only held the tin cup between both hands like she was afraid to waste the heat. They didn't speak much. Abram asked no more questions, and Mercy offered nothing. But as the light faded, he noticed how she kept glancing toward the west, like she was counting the minutes until someone came after her. Coyotes yipped far off. A snowshoe hare bounded across the open patch beyond the fire. Still, she didn't relax. When darkness took the sky, she began to weep. Quiet at first, then in a way that shook her shoulders. Abram sat across from her, staring into the fire, pretending not to notice. "Whatever's on you," he said finally. "You're clear of it for now." She didn't look up. The hours dragged until only the hiss of the fire and the whisper of wind in the pines remained. Somewhere after midnight, Abram stood, walked to the edge of the firelight, and looked out over the snowfield. Nothing moved. Still, he felt the itch between his shoulder blades, the old sense a man gets when he's being hunted. He turned back to her, seeing her face lit by the last of the coals, her cheeks red from crying, hair loose and wild from the wind. That's when he said it, quiet as a man telling himself what the weather would be tomorrow. By sunrise, you'll be my wife. Her hands froze around the cup. The fire popped, and in the silent dark beyond the light, something unseen shifted, as if the land itself had just taken a breath. The wind hadn't died with the night. It came sliding through the pines in long, cold breaths, bringing with it the creak of frozen branches and the faint groan of trees shifting under snow. Abram was up before the first pale wash of dawn touched the eastern ridges. He tossed another log on the fire, crouching low to coax it into a flame. Mercy was awake, though she hadn't moved much. She sat wrapped in the horse blanket he'd given her, her hands tucked deep under the wool. Her eyes were red, but there was a stubborn set to her mouth now, like she'd made up her mind about something in the night. "You meant it?" she asked without looking at him. Abram didn't answer right away. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, set one beside her on the stump. "A man doesn't say what he don't mean." Her laugh was brittle, almost like a cough. "And if I say no?" "You won't," he said simply. Mercy's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't press him. She sipped the coffee, gaze fixed on the fire. By mid-morning, they were riding east along a frozen creek, Abram in the saddle, Mercy walking alongside his mare. She didn't complain about the cold or about the pace, but now and then she winced like each step jarred something deep. Abram finally spoke. "Where's your people?" "Don't have any," she said flat. "Everybody's got somebody." She shook her head. "Not me." They traveled in silence a while longer. The land around them was hard and open, rolling up toward black-timbered slopes. A hawk circled high, its shadow crossing the snow like a ghost. "You running from someone," he said finally, "or toward something?" Her hand tightened on the mare's lead rope. "Don't matter. Folks in town won't want me either way." Abram looked down at her. "Town's full of people who can't see past their own supper plate. Ain't worth much worrying over." Mercy gave a small, humorless smile. "You don't know what they'll say." "I know," Abram replied. "And I don't give a damn." They reached a narrow canyon where the creek vanished between walls of granite. Abram knew the shortcut, a path barely wide enough for the mare to squeeze through. It was here, with the sound of water echoing off the stone, that he saw the first sign. A boot track in fresh snow, pressed deep and headed the way they'd come. He stopped, crouched over it. "You expecting company?" Mercy froze. No, Abram studied her face. She looked more frightened now than she had the night before. "Who's on your trail?" She hesitated too long. "Don't know his name," she said at last. "Big, mean, rode with 2 others." "What did you take from him?" Her jaw tightened. "Just myself." That told him more than the words. By the time they reached Abram's cabin, a squat, square place built from hand-hewn logs and banked with snow, it was near midday. Smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the smell of juniper. He'd kept the place alone for near a decade, since the war had spat him back out and sent him north. He stabled the mare and fetched water from the well while Mercy stood on the porch, looking out at the ridgeline. "You live here all alone?" He nodded. "Only way I know." Inside, the cabin was warm, lit by sunlight falling through the small glass panes in the front wall. The table was scarred, the chairs mismatched, but everything was neat. She moved slowly, like she didn't know if she was allowed to touch anything. Abram set bread and dried venison on the table, nodding toward it. "Eat." She ate like someone who didn't trust the food to last. That evening, he stepped out to split more wood. The air was sharp enough to bite, and the snow gave a faint squeak under his boots. From the tree line beyond the frozen field, he caught a glint sunlight flashing on metal. Gone in an instant. When he came back inside, Mercy was standing by the window, her shoulders tense. She turned toward him with wide eyes. "They found us," she said. He didn't ask how she knew. In town, 15 miles east, folks already talked when Abram Coulter's name came up. Some called him a good man who kept to himself. Others swore he was half wild and dangerous. Word would travel fast if he sheltered a strange woman, especially one as big as Mercy, a girl the world had already marked for ridicule. He knew what would come of it. Whispers, accusations, men who'd decide for themselves what kind of woman she was. He thought about the boot tracks in the canyon, about that flash of sunlight near the trees. Then he looked at Mercy, her face pale and stubborn in the firelight. He could send her down the trail in the morning, let her vanish into the cold and take her troubles with her. Or he could do what he'd already said, binding her to him in a way no man could unpick. He sat down across from her, poured 2 cups of coffee, and set his jaw. "Whatever's coming," he said, "we face it together. You understand." Mercy's eyes searched his, and for a moment her breath caught like she might cry again. Instead, she nodded once. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint, distant creak of leather and the crunch of boots in snow. The sound came first as a murmur in the dark. Boots crunching snow, leather creaking, something heavy shifting against a saddle. Then the faint jingle of spurs. Abram stood on the porch with the lamplight at his back, his rifle resting easy in his hands. The moon was up, silvering the field and the line of pines beyond. Mercy stayed just inside the door, clutching the edge of her shawl, her face pale. 3 shapes emerged from the tree line, slow and deliberate. They didn't hide. One walked ahead, broad through the shoulders, his hat brim low over his face. Behind him, 2 others followed, leading their horses. Abram didn't call out. He just waited, letting the cold gnaw at them as they crossed the open ground. When they stopped 20 feet from the porch, the lead man lifted his head. "You've got something of mine," he said. Mercy stiffened. Abram didn't move. "You'll have to be more specific." The man's teeth flashed in the moonlight. "That woman, she left owing me." "She owes you nothing," Abram replied. The man took a step closer. "She worked my place, ate my food, slept under my roof. Then she ran. I aim to collect what's mine." Abram's voice stayed low. "You're standing on my ground. That makes her under my roof now." The man's eyes narrowed. "Don't make this something it don't have to be." From the corner of his vision, Abram saw Mercy's hand clutching the doorframe, her knuckles white. He thought of sending her upstairs out of sight, but knew it would change nothing. "You've had your say," Abram told him. "Now you ride on." The lead man's grin faded. He turned his head just enough to speak to the others. "Go fetch her." One of them took a step toward the porch. Abram didn't raise his rifle, but he shifted it in his hands, and the small sound, the click of metal against leather, was louder than any shout. The man stopped. Mercy's voice came then, quiet but cutting through the cold air. "You think you can take me back? You think I'm still yours?" The leader turned his eyes on her. "You know what you are, girl. Ain't no one else gonna want you. He's just taking pity. It won't last." She flinched, but she didn't drop her gaze. Abram felt something shift inside him, like a rope pulled tight. "You're done talking to her," he said. The man smirked. "We'll be back." They turned slow, walking their horses out into the silvered snowfield. Their footsteps faded into the dark until only the wind was left. Back inside, Mercy sank into the chair by the fire. She didn't speak for a long while. Abram set his rifle against the wall and poured more coffee. "They'll come back," she said finally. He nodded. "That's likely." Her voice was low. "You should have let them take me. Would have saved you trouble." Abram pulled out the chair across from her and Saturday. "That's not how I was raised." She shook her head. "You don't know the things they'll say about me, the names they'll call me, what they'll think about you." "I don't lose sleep over small minds," he said. "What I do lose sleep over is thinking of you freezing to death in the dark, or being dragged back to a place you ran from." The next morning, word had already spread. By the time Abram rode into town for flour and lamp oil, 2 men at the mercantile stopped talking when he walked in. The storekeeper's wife looked at him, then at the street outside, then at him again with something like pity or warning in her eyes. "You got a visitor up at your place?" she asked. "Something like that," Abram said. "Folks are saying she belongs to a man out near the river. That she ran from him." "Folks say a lot of things," Abram replied. Outside, Abram passed Sheriff Clay, Rudd leaning against a hitching post. The sheriff's gaze was steady, his hat brim low. "Morning, Abram. Morning. You got Mercy James up at your place?" "I do." The sheriff shifted the toothpick in his mouth. "I don't reckon that's a good idea." Abram's eyes met his. "Not your decision. It might be if there's trouble," Rudd said. "And there will be." Abram swung into the saddle. "I'll handle it." As he rode out of town, he caught sight of the three men from the night before, standing near the livery. They didn't smile. They just watched him go. That night, the wind carried a new sound, low, distant, and steady. Hoofbeats. Slow at first, then more of them like a gathering storm. Mercy stood at the window, her hands clenched at her sides. "They're coming," she whispered. Abram stepped up beside her, staring out into the black. The sound grew, echoing through the frozen valley. It wasn't just three riders now. It was more, and they weren't waiting for morning. The hoofbeats rolled through the dark like a slow drum, each one carrying the weight of something that wouldn't be talked down. Abram could feel them through the floorboards. Steady, unhurried, confident. Men who believed they had the right to come, the right to take. He pulled the lamp wick low until the cabin went dim, only the fire giving off light. "Stay away from the windows," he told Mercy. She didn't move. "They'll burn this place if they can't take me," she said, her voice tight. "They'll have to get close to try." Outside, the moon slid in and out of cloud. 10, maybe 12 riders came into view, their shapes shifting in the shadows. They drew up at the edge of the clearing, the horse's breath steaming in the cold. The lead man was the same as before, though now he had more behind him, hollow-eyed drifters, hard-faced ranch hands, and two men Abram recognized from town. That told him something ugly. Whatever story had been told was spreading, and it was winning believers. "You got my woman in there?" the lead man called out. His voice carried easily in the thin night air. "She's not yours," Abram replied from the porch, rifle in hand but pointed at the ground. The man laughed. "You don't even know her. I fed her, clothed her, given her work. That makes her mine more than yours." Abram's tone stayed even. "That's not how it works." There was a murmur among the riders, half amusement, half the kind of talk men do before something turns violent. One of them called out, "You keeping her for yourself, Coulter?" Another laughed. "Bet he is. Who else would want her?" Abram felt Mercy tense behind the door. He didn't turn, didn't look at her. The cold in his chest wasn't from the wind anymore. "You boys say one more word like that," he said, "and you're not leaving upright. Do you?" Amos looked at her then, really looked, at the weariness in her shoulders, the set of her mouth, the way her eyes had learned to guard themselves. "If I did, you wouldn't be standing here." Her gaze softened just enough for something like relief to flicker through. That night, Amos sat at the table, cleaning his rifle. The fire snapped in the hearth, the only light in the room. "I've been thinking," Lark said from the doorway. "Maybe I should go. Pike, Levi, they're not gonna stop. Not while I'm here." Amos didn't look up from the rifle. "If you go, they'll hunt you alone. You won't last a day." She stepped closer. "And if I stay, they'll come here. You'll get killed over something that's not even yours to carry." He set the rifle down, the soft click of metal on wood loud in the quiet. "It became mine the moment I told Pike no." They stared at each other across the dim light. Neither spoke again. Outside, the night had gone too still. No wind, no coyotes, nothing. Then, faint but certain, came the sound of hoofbeats. Slow, heavy, getting closer. Amos rose, the rifle in his hands before the chair even stopped rocking. Lark's eyes were wide now, but her voice was steady. "It's starting." He nodded once. Somewhere in his gut, Amos knew this wouldn't be Pike or Levi. Whoever was coming was a different kind of danger entirely. The kind that would end with him in that frozen creek, and her whispering for him to shoot her instead. Snow had fallen in the night, muting the world into a cold, endless white. Amos's breath puffed in the still air, each exhale loud in the silence. The stranger across the frozen creek stood motionless, one gloved hand resting near the butt of his revolver. The man was tall, lean, his coat dusted with frost, eyes pale as winter sky. Amos had never seen him before, yet the stranger's gaze carried something familiar, like a shadow from a story Lark had never told in full. Behind Amos, Lark's boots crunched faintly on the snow. He didn't have to turn to know she was there. "Don't shoot the stranger," she whispered, her voice raw in the cold. "Shoot me instead. I have nothing left." It was not the sound of someone bargaining for mercy. It was the sound of someone finished with running. The stranger's eyes shifted past Amos, landing on her. His mouth twitched. Not a smile, not quite, but a flicker of something unreadable. "You're far from where you belong, Lark," he said. His voice was quiet, deep, carrying easily in the frozen air. Amos didn't lower his rifle. "She belongs where she's safe." The man tilted his head slightly, studying him. "Safe isn't something she's owed. Not after Levi." Lark's breath hitched. "Levi followed me. He—" She stopped herself, eyes darting away. "He wouldn't let me leave." "Amos, I didn't mean to." The stranger cut in. "Levi Crane was my brother." The words hung between them, heavy and unmoving. Amos tightened his grip on the rifle. "Then I'm guessing you're here to finish what Pike started." The man shook his head once. "No, I came to hear it from her. And I have." Lark stepped forward, the snow sighing under her weight. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady now. "Your brother meant to drag me back to Pike. I warned him I wouldn't go. He didn't listen. He came at me in the dark, and I—" She swallowed hard. "It was him or me." The stranger's gaze didn't soften, but he didn't move for his gun either. "Then I reckon you've already carried your punishment longer than I could make it last." Amos's rifle wavered, just slightly. "That it? You ride all this way just to let it go?" The man's pale eyes met his. "Some debts get settled without blood. Sometimes the living pay more than the dead ever could." He turned his horse without another word, riding back into the white silence. The sound of hoofbeats faded until only the whisper of the wind remained. Lark stood rooted, her breath shaking now that it was over. Amos lowered the rifle, the weight of it suddenly heavier than any fight. "You could have told me," he said quietly. "I didn't know if you'd still keep me here," she answered. He looked at her for a long moment, then handed her the rifle. "Then I guess you'll just have to stay and find out." They walked back toward the cabin together, the snow swallowing their tracks almost as fast as they made them. By nightfall, the wind would cover every sign of the stranger's visit. Pike might still come. Others might too. But for now, the prairie was still, and the fire inside Amos Ridge's cabin burned warm against the cold. And somewhere deep in that quiet, Lark Winslow began to believe, just a little, that she might have something left after all.